Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out, and thank you for joining us in the lower level of the Stayer Center. This is my first occasion here, probably yours as well. Nice to know we have a space like this on offer if something unexpected happens to your auditorium. Our next guest will arrive on March 1st, so I think the auditorium should be back in service by then. This is 10 years hence. Our speaker this morning comes to us from Geneva, Switzerland. Sandro Cattacin studied economic history, political science, and political philosophy at the University of Zurich. With an Italian fellowship, he participated in the PhD program in political and social science in the European University Institute in Florence, where he obtained his doctorate in 1992. After his graduate studies, Cattacin worked as a researcher and senior lecturer at the University of Geneva, then as executive director of the Laboratoire de Recherche Sociale et Politique Appliquée, an interdisciplinary institute at the University of Geneva. As a professor in sociology and political science, he's offered courses at the University of Geneva on Swiss politics, comparative methods, political theory, and social policy. He's also taught at the University of Freiburg and has served as chair of regional politics at the University of Constance. From 1999 to 2004, he was director of the Swiss Forum for Migration and Population Studies at the University of Neuchâtel and associate professor in the Faculty of Law and Social Sciences at the same university. For 6 years, he was professor in social and health policy at the Institut de Haute Étude and Administration Publique in Lausanne. And since 2003, he has served as professor in sociology in the department at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the University of Notre Dame and to the United States of America, Professor Sandro Cattacin.
Hello, and thank you for this invitation. I'm very nervous to talk here, and I'm very nervous to talk to this topic, which is a very hot topic, and I'm really curious to hear your reaction at the end of my 45 minutes conference on this topic of migration and migration policies. So what is the topic and what have I done? The topic is about a new way to think migration today, to read our society as a mobile society and the consequences of this change related to concrete policies we have to develop or we could develop if we think about these trends I will present. First of all, I will try to explain why we need a paradigm shift, why it's not the first paradigmatic shift we have in the analysis of migration. Then I will say some words about the way I proceeded to make this kind of analysis I tried to explain to you. I will focalize on 4 major changes in the way migration is analyzed today, and I have called them like you see it there. The first would be a change from the analysis of what is called migration to analysis of what is called today, more and more, mobility studies. A second element or a second trend I will describe concerns the change from a clear orientation to a nation as a place of belonging to multiple belongings and multiple citizenships, and in particular the way the cities present new rules of living together as new ways of belonging and as new citizenships. The third trend I would try to describe is the trend from the fear of foreigners to the idea that innovation and diversity are related, something like an innovation concept of mobility. The last trend in this kind of analysis I will present concerns the asylum politics and the politics in the field of development. I will try in this field too to describe some major changes that are going on. How have I worked for this, for the identification of these four trends you will hear now? I have analyzed only first-class journals writing on migration issues like ethnic and racial studies, like the GIMI, Journal of International Migration, etc. And I have tried to find out which are the articles that are trying to change the way to analyze migration. I find around 100 articles, more or less, in these journals and discussed many of them with the authors and also with my staff, and then analyzed what are the challenges they are trying to explain and how we can put these challenges in something like a new way to read migration. So that was the methodological approach. And the result are these four ways to think about migration. I have first simply differentiated immigration policies from integration policies, from development policies, and from the policies related to development policies. The first one, I forget it all the time, but there are four. Migration, integration. Yes, the classical policies of regional development related to migration. That means the question of ghettos and housing. But at the end, these four classical fields of analysis were not so important for the understanding of what is going on in the study of migration. Yeah, what is going on? It's going on a real change of the way of thinking what migration is. I think from the point of view of the main field of analysis I have, which is Europe, but I think the majority of the things I will say concerns not only Europe, the logic is relatively clear. First analysis of migration were related to the idea that we need people coming to a place to help for the industrial and economic development. They have to go when we don't need them no more. The concept of guest workers were extremely important in this period of analysis, something like people being there from a shorter period only to help something like a development we cannot afford as locals. The guest worker paradigm was extremely important until the 1970s in a little bit all countries that have had large migration flows coming to them. Guest workers were in these countries taken like people not necessarily being to integrate or to include in the society, but simply to keep them in a certain way in isolated places and keep them also in good form to be able to answer to the demands. Guest workers returned, many of them really, to their home country. A majority doesn't return, and so implanted themselves in countries. And what is interesting, if they don't go home, they are no more guest workers. They are here. And so you have to change the way to talk about these people. And the majority of the wordings in the laws and in the analysis changed from guest workers to foreigners. They are foreigners in a country. And foreigners have to have rights, have to have services. And so the whole discussion was until the 70s about this place of foreigners in a specific country. Anti-foreigner movements arrived also in the 1970s, so that the word foreigner was more and more a word analyzed as a problematic word, something like a negative, a connotated, a stigmatized word, like people that we don't want here. They are not from here, they are foreigners. And so in the political and public discussion, the word migration entered more and more in in the field of analysis, but also in the public field of discussion. So migrants and migration as a new world, a more neutral world, was invented in the 1990s in laws, in institutions, and in the way we talked about the phenomenon of people changing the place of living. I think these are all signs of something going on, of something we can call a new paradigm of analysis of this reality. Migrants seemed to be more neutral, but nevertheless, and again, I would say that since 10, 15 years, the word migrants is also negatively connotated. And you see that we are searching as scientifics, as researchers, wordings that are more neutral, that gives something like an analytical dimension to what we are analyzing. And so arrived in the beginning of this century, some scholars to the idea not more to talk about migrants and migration, but to talk about mobility and mobile people. It's today something we are calling a new paradigm in the analysis of migration, talking about mobility and mobile people, as it was launched at the beginning of this century by John Ury, in particular a specialist of mobility studies. And he said clearly, we have no more to read the society as a society of people going from one place to another, and being there foreigners, guest workers, or migrants. But you have to analyze the world as a world in which the normality is to be mobile. And what is strange is people that are not mobile, people that are at the same place all the time. And John Ury has had a good idea and integrated this idea in many of his studies. And today I think there is something like a strong division in the research on migration studies and mobility studies, which is characterized by people working always with this migration idea and people working with this mobility idea. A nice article in Ethnic and Racial Studies, a recent article of Janine Dahinden, called in a certain way as something like even a political statement to demigrantify migration studies, to try not no more to think in this logic migration, but to try to find other ways to talk about this world. Something like a paradigm shift is going on. They have tried to see what it means and what topic this paradigm shift of no more migration but more mobility is about. And I have identified these 4 trends I told you before, and I think we can go through these 4 trends because they have all aspects which are interesting, but they are all interrelated. So we will find elements in one trend and in another, but they have different consequences and I think also different impacts on policies. So the first trend begins with this idea of mobility and with the idea that we have to change the way to think migration from a way of classical Fordist path that was the guest worker path transformed in a foreigner path, which means nothing else that the people came from one place and sedentarized in another place, arrived in another place, formed a family, reproduced themselves, the kids, and all this question of first, second, third generation in the analysis we have had. This was the classical path in the post-war period and until the 70s. Italians coming to the States in the 20s, for instance, they came forever to the States. They decided no more to return to Italy. It was something like a clear cut and a new beginning of living in a concrete place. This idea of sedentarization was related to keeping in a certain way, to creating in a certain way a new reality for a family, permitting to this family to go out of poverty and to give a chance to the kids of a social advancement. I think it's important, this idea that the first generation was in their head a sacrificed generation. All was done for the kids, and the kids were the advancement and not the parents. The parents had simply the possibility to survive, but lived their migration as a renunciation, as a problem of giving something of her life to her kids as a necessity for the survival of the whole family. So social advancement was related to sedentarization and to the social mobility of the kids, of the second generation kids. In contrast to this 40s path, and since the 1970s, we have a new way of thinking migration, which is no more related to the sacrifice of the parents for the kids, but on the idea that mobility creates for me a chance of social advancement. In a certain way, it's no more this waiting moment that we need, but it's clearly related to the decision to be mobile, to have the possibility to have a better salary, a better economic position in a concrete place I'm going. So it's no more waiting. It's directly going and having better conditions and social advancement, which is related to mobility. If you think about this flexibility path, what you are living in your everyday experiences, what you will have as reality in your future, you will not live in South Bend, I think, all your life. You will have a mobility to have the possibility to live better, to have better social conditions. So mobility is today more important than class relations, than a power relation characterized by your position in the society. The social advancement is no more related directly to your family, but it's more direct, it's more related to what are your choices of mobility. This kind of analysis is at the center of many mobility studies. I think it's an important element for understanding why people goes so fast from one place to another, and why, and that's very important, people change the place of living if they don't find a good job in this place. So in contrast to the sedentarization, to this idea that I arrive in a place and I will be there all my life and my kids will be there all their life, the new path means that I go to places in which I work, and if I don't have no more work there, I change again. And if I want to have social advancement, I have to change all the time the place I'm living. We have in the most innovative societies and the most fast-changing societies in Europe, mobility paths of 5 years. You live 5 years at the same place, and then you have to change. They are related, these mobility paths, also to the job changes. And that concerns certainly not only international mobility, but also internal mobility inside nations. But the reality we are describing today is clearly that if you are not mobile, you risk to have problems, social problems in your life. There are a group in Finland which is working on immobility studies. And it's very interesting. They analyze people that have difficulties to change the place of living. And these people have many characteristics related to need of assistance, to need of help from the social services, than the people which are mobile. So, if you think about politicians that describe migration and mobility as a problem today, and of poor people realities, it's simply talking about a reality which has nothing to do with what we describe as sociologists as the normality in our society. Migration is a chance, is a decision, is a chance of social advancement. The normality of our today living are multilocal experiences, are continuously mobile people living in differentiated places at the same time, having experiences in their whole life of national and international mobility, and certainly others of transborder mobility, which is in this small Europe today a very clear normality of people living around Luxembourg, for instance, or around Geneva. These translocal experiences are very interesting because they change completely the way of thinking the territory of living. You are no more thinking a territory as a static place in which you do all what you have to do, but territories are places in which you choose moments of your life that you organize there. You live in a place, you work in another place, tomorrow you will work in another place again, live in another place, perhaps. You can combine more today this possibility of living translocally. The translocal element is also very interesting because you have this possibility to relate this experience to social media and to social media use. I have had this very impressive interviews with a Senegalese drug dealer in Geneva, and he was extremely good organized. And every day he has his hours of work and his hours of recreation and his hours with his girlfriend. And it was very strange because I asked him where his girlfriend lives. And he said to me, in Senegal, near to Dakar. And you see it each day? Yes, we eat each day together. And how is it possible? Explain me. And he explained me that each day at 9 o'clock he returns in his apartment, in his small flat he has, and eat together via Skype with his girlfriend. So he has a possibility to live in the same moment in two places, to have social contacts with people living in other places. This hybridification of the territory is extremely important for mobile people and increases the easiness of the choice to be mobile. You can say today, it's not so costly. I can keep my friends. And if you think about your friends on Facebook, how many live in Notre Dame, live here in South Bend? Probably not all people. You have a very large network of people you know. We have also asked to people to make a little draft of their world map, in beginning with the people they know and they meet regularly. And you see, you don't have no more this neighborhood card or plan that you design with the people you know, but you have something like plans that goes around the world, around places which have strange forms of being together. And I think this new ways of living has extremely important consequences of the way we work as policymakers on the question of migration. First of all, we see that networked families are very normal in the mobile world, that you have through divorce, through recombining and mobility, a reality of living of the kids already in a mobility world, in a mobile world. Education is also organized through movement. Multi-territorial organizations and firms are also the normality of our reality, and you risk one day working in a small firm that they explain you that the next day you have to work, or the next week you have to go to work on another continent, and you will do it if you want not to, if you like your job. So all the elements are related to the normality, all the elements of economic and social organization of our society is related to the normality of mobility. But the consequence clearly of the regulation of these identities, which I call complex identities, I don't have better words, but I think it's a good word to talk about complexity concerning identities, but you have to find better words, I'm sure. The question is how you regulate this reality of complex belongings if the state is always related to something like a static territory, which people that are there are the people that decide there, they live there, they have their families there. So if you think about how we organize the school system, universities less, but the school system clearly, but the houses and the plannings of the cities, we are always thinking about people that are always there in a very static way. So that means that the territorial regulation has to find new ways to planify, I think, our society in which mobility is the normality. Words like transition states we use all the time are very strange if you think about the fact that you're always in a transition period, always in a transition state, that normally you don't have the idea to arrive somewhere and no more change the place you are. You can also integrate to be there all the time. Integration policies, that's something I like so much. They think that the people arrive and they will no more go from there. and they think they will assimilate to a place. They will be accommodated with all what is around. They will learn the language. But I will only learn the language if I think that I can have a good job here. If I don't have a good job here, I will not be interested on integration policies. And then it depends on the language and on the job you find. So integration policies are in the old paradigm of a static society. And I think we have to think about a new way of working with this mobility reality. Urban planning, I said already. The critique of this analysis is very obvious. They say I'm talking and have talked about this kind of change. They're saying that I'm talking about rich people that have the possibility to choose mobility, that are all the time in a certain way in this freedom of choosing what they want to do tomorrow. But in fact, the reality of poor people and poor people's reality is very similar. Mobility is not a paradigm for the rich, but probably concerns more the poor than the rich. The poor has more difficulties to realize a good life in the place they are without mobility. They have to do these choices all the time. And if you think about the migration that we have now, the very problematic migration we have now from Africa to Europe, with people that risk their life, if you ask them why they do that, they talk to you like a high-skilled mobile professional. They say, I want to have better conditions of living. I want to have a good job. I want to do something other. And if you ask them, what arrives to you if you don't find this good job? I will continue to search. I will continue to be mobile. Alain Tarius has called that globalization from below. And if you go to analyze, as he has done, the financial importance of this globalization from below, of the globalization of the poor, if you want, you see immediately that it's extremely important. It's more important even in some sectors as the globalization, which is completely legal and analyzed by the legal flows we know from of finance and of products and services. This globalization, which is from below, which is an illegal world, has an enormous importance also from an economic point of view for our planet, and it organizes their own migrant flows around the world. Laura Augustine was also very critique against the idea that mobility is something for the rich and not for the poor. And she analyzed that these poor people that choose to migrate don't see themselves as victims. They see themselves as agents, as people that have the possibility to take into their hands their life. So in a certain way, mobility concerns not high-skilled people alone, it concerns poor people too. It concerns people that that choose mobility for love. If I think about statistics in Europe, it's the most important argument to change the place of living is love today. Yeah. You love somebody and you go to the place the person is living, or you choose together a third place. Age is a new element of mobility. Old age people change the place of living. You know that from the States. The people go to Miami, and other arguments are relevant. To talk today really about a complete, yes, that's a paradigm shift, a complete analytical tool, which is the mobility, the analysis of the mobility for all realities we are trying to understand. The second important trend or change of trend which I want to analyze is related certainly to the mobility. I think that's why I talked so much about mobility. It will be shorter for the other three trends. The second trend concerns the belonging question and the belonging to different places. I talked to you before about this Senegalese guy who belongs to Geneva as an irregular migrant. He's clandestino there. He belongs to Senegal all the time. He has friends in France friends in France, and he has many other networked people around the world he is in contact. So that's a normality of belonging that we have all more or less. So a world that changes from only one belonging to the nation state normally to a world in which the multiple belongings are the clear reality of all of us. I don't know if it is more in Europe like that as in the United States, but if I ask in a class like that how many of the young people have more than one passport, the 3/4 of the class will answer you that they have a double or a triple citizenship. So they have 2 passports. So what does this mean? It means that you have no more this clear belonging to a place and saying, I will die for this place if you go in a war. You say, okay, no, I will choose the place in which I will die for the war you are organizing. Multiple citizenship changes completely the idea of national belonging. And what is interesting, and Manuel Castells analyzed that very, very nicely, is that it brings out more an idea of concrete local belonging as a reference than an idea of belonging to a nation state. What it means with that in a certain way the local and more the urban world is the world in which people find themselves better in a logic of belonging than at the level of a national belonging. They are from neighborhoods more than from a state. They are from a city more than from a state. They are from a small place more than as from the state. And this in a certain way explains a logic of surviving, because you need to belong somewhere when you are a mobile people. And what we have seen in these logics of creating this very local belonging is that this belonging is very fragile. You can change it. And you can even have really strange histories of belonging. Something like, I feel to belong to Bologna, where I lived during 1 year, but also a little bit to Geneva, where I lived during 20 years, and a little bit to I don't know where. So you create a belonging world which is no more a nation-state belonging world, but a local belonging world. There are places, concrete places, in which you imagine something. A restaurant, a park, a lake, I don't know what, but things that you like in this place, and in particular people. People are no more really representative of nationals. They are representatives of a specific neighborhood, a specific place. You meet them. And if they change the place, it's complicated to create something like a normality of this territorial unique belonging. So it's a fragile belonging, and I think it's very important, this fragile belonging. It's a fragile belonging at this local level that creates also something like a necessity of the urban world, of the cities, to answer to this new people arriving. In particular, in the field of irregular migration, we have analyzed that cities are organizing more and more programs for these people living in a city, in a large city or in a small city, but normally in the cities, like access to health, like social services. And clearly, we are very confused about the idea that cities are doing social welfare and no more the nation states, in particular in Europe, where the nation states is the place of social policies. And we are analyzing, we have seen that many of these cases are related to the fact that cities are confronted with a new distinction in the development of the welfare state, in which the welfare state is responsible for the normal, I would say, redistribution programs, and the local state, the local and the urban state, for all specific demands. These specific demands creates the new way cities think about themselves as places of social policies and of health policies, as major places of developing of these policies. And why they do that? It's very simple. I asked them. I asked Major. I asked people working with irregular migrants, and they say simply, if we want to be a competitive, nice city, we have to do all what we can against social problems, because the rich people don't like social problems. Investors don't like social problems. So for us, city, if you want to be rich and competitive, we have to develop a very strong social policy. And more people, the creative people who arrive to our city, they expect that the city is responsible. They don't want to go to a place of bad guys, of bad people. They want to go to places in which people have morality. So the city develop and invest in politics that create very fast belonging, that create very fast services for people in difficulties. And this to be competitive in the international concurrence of cities. We have in the United States also this development of sanctuary cities, which today in Europe was also taken as a new way to say to the nation states, you cannot intervene in the city if you have irregular migrants. We defend them, we want them, they have a job, they help the city to be a good city. So really a new, would say, a socialism, which is very pragmatic in a certain way, is developing in the urban context. And it remembers a little bit the Middle Age, and it remembers a little bit the 19th century. The welfare state came later. Before were the cities were the places of freedom, of liberty, of services. And today we are in a certain sense again in this new world of extreme important roles of the cities. Cities are risky places because if they develop rights that are not in the constitution but are related to specific conditions of people, they create easily to instrumentalize rights. Lazaridis and Consta called them a plastic citizenship, something like a citizenship that you cannot go to the judge to say, I have this right. But you are dependent on social service associations and on decisions which are not ruled by the strong law, but ruled by informal elements. Yeah, their strong partner of the city is no more the nation states, but the argument for the development of these concrete policies that they do nothing else than observe the human rights. So we have a coalition which creates a sandwich position of the nation state between the human rights idea and the international organizations on the one side and the supranational organization on the one side and the large urban world against the nation state. This is this kind of reality which we have analyzed in many cases. It's in particular Yuri Katsepov who has done empirical and quantitative studies about this new way of drifting social politics to the cities and of new coalitions with supranational organizations. The third trend, which is really related to the city as a place of diversity and of differences, concerns these discourses we have even in the States every day today, which are the fear against foreigners, these xenophobic tendencies, and the idea to analyze mobility, diversity, as an element related to innovation. Otherness was always seen as a problem in the classical Fordist society, was seen as a problem of assimilation. We have to create homogeneity, and this homogeneity has to be improved every day in that direction to adapt to a culture. Imagine this word, adapting to a culture. We don't know what the culture of Chicago is. You have thousands of cultural forms living together in large cities. So this idea was a defense strategy. If we change as society, we risk our reproduction as a homogeneous culture. And the whole economic system of the after-war period was organized in the idea of homogeneity. Today, as you know, and through the changes we have had in the 70s, cultural revolution, return of the long path from the renaissance of the individualization and with the flexibility of the economy, the idea of homogeneity is seen as a problem. Homogeneity is not a good element for a firm. It's not a good element to be innovative. You have to go in the direction to create a society in which differences helps to be innovative. Otherness is no more a problem in the context of economic development, in the context of social improvement of your capacity to live in a complex society. It's related to innovation. We have this very easy way to explain that. If you meet somebody who is, I don't know, Catholic from South Bend, and he lived here all the time, and you meet another guy from South Bend, also Catholic, and they discuss together, they will repeat what's said since 10 years, 20 years, 100 years in this place. But if you meet in South Bend a Catholic and a Protestant, it's already something challenging. If there is a Muslim together, okay, you have to go from a normality of Catholicism to a normality of multiple religion affiliations. That means an opening of your mind. So difference is always opening. And so in the logic of innovation, differences are elements that could help to improve. If you go to see on the internet, on YouTube, the brainstorm sessions of Google, you see normally people that are in a room, you see that they are from all the parts of the world you can imagine. They have different clothes, they sit in different ways, and they have in these brainstorm sessions nothing else to do to solve a problem. And Google organizes this with the idea the most different participants have the more possibility to find an innovative solution for a problem they have. So in this sense, we can clearly relate innovation today to diversity and to differences. Richard Florida has tried to call that the creative class, and the idea that creativity is related to differences. And I think that the urban world has this discourse of differences clearly in the everyday reality, which is very strange because you arrive to New York and they told you that it's an open city, and then you open Fox News and they say we closed the United States. You have always an ambivalent discourse today between what cities want and what the reality of the national politics are of this normality of homogeneity. And I think we have here a very productive ambiguity, which certainly is today a major point in the change of reading mobility and migration. Last point, I have some minutes, 6 minutes, to talk to you, concerns development and asylum policies. I'm working since 2 or 3 years on post-colonial studies about the place of Switzerland in colonialism. You would say it's not a colonial country, but it was a colonial country. So we have this kind of analysis going on in my team. And what is interesting in this kind of analysis is always the same, that nation states feel like normal to instrumentalize the countries they invest. And for Switzerland, for instance, the new Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, yes, if you invest 1 franc, we want to have back 3 francs. So it's a good affair to work in the development industry. But you can imagine if you do that, if this is the logic that development is having a chance to have more return, if you give money and you want more return back, it's clear that the idea of development is compromised. So we analyzed in these articles what is going on in terms of new ways to think about asylum and development, and we realized an extreme critique of all the old-style classical development policies we know and which exist today. And in contrast, they tried to see what are the good ways to think about this relation. And many studies underlined First of all, that the idea is no more development from a power position to a weak position, but the idea of co-development. This new strategy concerns more or less all fields. We find in particular good proof that this is a way of thinking of thinking progressive and of thinking productive in the field of education, economics, and clearly also in the classical development policies. In the field of education, there are now clearly universities and not nation states that make contracts between them and universities in so-called developing countries. Geneva has, I think, around 10 contracts with countries in Africa in this moment. And what they do, they don't go to these countries to talk them how they have to analyze the society and sending Sandro explain them. No, they call Sandro, yes, that's clear, but we have also Ahmed coming to us. And he talks about what their analysis of the society is. This kind of exchange of students and teachers are extremely important to arrive to combine and to open the mind clearly of our students and of the way to understand what is going on in our society. A simple example, I will go, I think, in 2-3 weeks to Rabat, and we will talk with our African colleagues about the question of mobility. And as I began to organize this conference with my colleague from Montreal and from Brussels, so we are really, it's a large consortium, we have immediately seen that for the African colleagues, this word mobility was not new. Their analysis of migration is since 20, 30 years an analysis of circulating migration, of circulation. So circulating means nothing else than mobility. In a certain way, we will have 2-3 days with students in which we discuss what brings together mobility and circulation studies, and probably many things that opens and give more strength to these concepts. But education means that people change places and learn each from another. Economics, clearly the same. We invest today no more in the idea that we have to help the economic development of a place, but we have better possibilities if we develop together elements. So there is, for instance, a Swedish organization that invests in startups in Dakar. Startups in Dakar. And these startups develops apps, and these apps are used around the world. Thirdly, and I think it's very important that we have seen that in the development, not the state, but associations are extremely important. Association of migrants, of mobile people, which create very strong and very pragmatic ties between places in which they can control the effectiveness of the investment. So I would say from this fourth trend, what we can learn is clearly that we don't need no more state development policies directed to other states. This we know today is create more corruption than development. But we need states that has intermediary organizations, that has civic society organizations, that has universities and migrant associations as partners. Yeah, for the 4 trends. And now I have 20 seconds for the conclusions. It's not so much that I want to say. I'm very aware that what I'm telling to you, what we are going on, what we see in our society, has not so much to do with what politicians are saying about migration today. And this return of the nationalistic discourse, of the populistic discourse, of telling another story, of telling about closing borders and not opening borders. But it's clear, these discourses are reactions, for many people, are reactions of a very complex situation in a complex world. I can understand that if all is changing, if all is mobile, and if as an immobile person I have social problems, I can understand that it's a problem for me and that I want to return to the old times and to have this clear link between belonging, place, and nation. But in fact, this reality could be even possible, but probably not with nation states policies, but more with coordinated policies between, yes, why not nation states, but more between large urban centers and supranational organizations. We can no more, as nation state today, say how to manage the economy. The economy is global, it's completely out of this nation states logics. But we can reintegrate the economy in something like, I would say, moral way through supranational solutions. So it's not the national level that has to answer to the globalized economy, but probably the globalized nation state that has to think about solutions for these difficulties to find orientation in this society. Yeah, I will not go I will not go for with other elements I have here, but in a certain way, we have to think about a society that tomorrow will not be more easily to read, but probably more complex to read, in which institutions are less stable than they were before. But what I feel positive in this way of reading tomorrow is that probably young people today are able to live this as a normality, in contrast to older people who are very challenged by this continuous changing world. We are doing since years, since 16 years, we are monitoring values and behaviors of young people in Switzerland, and we are working with other groups from other countries together to see what their study says. And I'm very impressed about the fact that they are telling us another reality of tomorrow than the reality we hear from politicians. They have very concrete, very pragmatic ways of thinking society. They don't have really problems with diversity. They don't talk about them. They live that. So it's an anchored, in a certain way, multiculturalism, like Martiniello says, which is the normality. So perhaps we can simply wait some years and society will again enter in a better world. Thank you.
Well, we have microphones. We have an opportunity for questions for the next 20 minutes, perhaps. Professor, let me begin. I was familiar with, in the 1970s and 80s, what was thought of as a really brilliant guest worker program in Switzerland, in which guest workers were registered, invited, provided with banking services, healthcare, the opportunity for remittances back to their families. But the program has gone away. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that and perhaps why that happened and what the prospects for improved guest worker programs might be.
The guest worker program was developed after the Second World War in this Fordist context. So it was a challenge to have foreigners in Switzerland. And so they tried to find rules that they don't they don't have the idea not to return to Italy. So they have to return after 9 months and lived in this country as, yes, in a certain way, in small ghettos all around all cities and near to all large constructions. There was a movement against this guest worker program too. So it was more a social problem that we don't have no more today, this guest worker program. But the main argument against the guest worker program, and I think that's important, was in the beginning of the 1990s, the free circulation of people in Europe. So the answer, against isolation, yeah, was to enter in a program of free circulation of people in the European Union. And as this was decided, it was certainly challenging again for the idea of a society, of a homogeneous society, but in a certain way they permitted to have more and more equilibrium inside a European economy. So guest worker programs were good for the period of the industrialization, but are no more a real good answer if you are in a period in which mobility is normality. So you cannot block people somewhere during 9 months or create quotas for the entry of them. But very near to this idea of the guest worker program, and are the ideas that you have a normalized migration to a place, or normalized mobility to a place, in which you decide what are the criteria related to the people you need in a fastly changing economy. I think about the Canadian program that is based on the fact that they change each year the criteria of entry. So they are not guest workers. They receive a permission to enter and a regular resident permission. So if you want to go to Canada the next weeks, you can go this evening on internet on the site of the government of Canada, and you can fill in a questionnaire. And if you have the good characteristics they are searching for tomorrow, they will give you the permission to enter. And these characteristics are not only related to highly skilled competences, but if they need people in the sector of construction, if you have the characteristic to be a good worker, you will receive the entry possibility. And so it's more flexible than others. Clearly, the question of regulating people was always an illusion. Even in Switzerland, the guest worker program was on the facade working, but behind you have had economic interest that decided how many arrives, which conditions they have, and I think it's important to analyze in particular our societies like society in which liberal capitalism decides more or less how many people goes to a place. If you have a bad economy, and I worked on that, if you have a shrinking city, if you have no jobs, nobody will arrive to your country or your city. So mobility is always related to a chance that is somewhere possibly there. If there is not there, you will die as economy and as a local economy. Shrinking cities in Eastern Europe were analyzed by colleagues from Germany in particular, and they found out that the characteristic of these shrinking cities are also shrinking diversity of the city. In a certain way, the less your city has characteristics related to diversity of origins, the less the chance of being able to survive in a liberal economy.
Thank you. Questions?
Professor, how would you, so you pitched the nationalism or the nation state as something that could maybe disappear in a transition to more fluid sorts of borders, although that's a bad term for the example. How do you reconcile that with legal and economic theory around the tragedy of the commons, and you have people who come to a particular place, exhaust its resources, move on, exhaust resources there, move on. It seems as though nation states and borders give the people there property rights that combat the tragedy of the commons.
Mm-hmm. I think that we have to work on new commons and no more on property commons to analyze our society. And perhaps what we need is that societies, and in particular concrete territorial unities, organizes new commons of belonging that are not related to material elements or to property. Because irregular migrants in a sanctuary city, for instance, yeah, they have no rights. But nevertheless, this city says to them, you have some rights, and we try to enlarge them. And these new commons are more immaterial commons. We work on rituals in this moment. It could be interesting topic, and call these rituals which are related to places, rituals of territorial inclusion. We call them also commons, and you receive nothing other than a sign, if you can participate to this ritual, that you are part of this city or of this place. So perhaps the old idea of the commons is a nice one, but you have to transform it in a more flexible idea, creating fast answers to the question of belonging if you arrive in a place.
Questions?
Do you think that language barriers hinder mobility, especially for poor people who are trying to gain social advancement and economic advancement?
Language is good to know, it's good to have, and the more you know, the better it is. Certainly, I'm a little bit ambivalent about that, because if you arrive to Geneva and you speak English, nobody asks you to learn French, for instance. So it depends a little bit on the major languages, on the economic value of the languages. There's François Grain is a very good economist which works on this language economics, and that's very objective. He says if you know this language, you earn 10% less than if you know this language. So in a certain way, yes, it's good to know the languages of the places, but not for all. For certain people, they have a language that's sufficiently good. Nevertheless, I'm working on language policies a little bit in Switzerland because it's a very nice topic, and I have seen that the people that have the more than one language knowledge in every case are better on the market. If you know the local language, it's good, but learn this language in a way that it is useful for having more chances. What so-called integration programs are doing in this moment is to explain to people 200 words in the language, in the local language, which permits them to go, I don't know, in the cleaning sector or doing bad paid work. I think that you have to give to the people the chance to learn very well and very good the language they want to learn. For their, that's not important why, but they have the possibility to learn languages. I think it's an offer that we have to produce as normality, to give a chance, a possibility for being socially, to advance socially. So yes, but it depends.
Question.
Thank you for being here, Professor. Does research show that migration and mobility is circular? For example, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
You had a massive migration from Colombia to Venezuela. And now with the situation in Venezuela, you have a massive migration from Venezuela all over South America, but mostly Colombia because of the shared border. So is this cyclical? You'll see how countries react to this as well. So is there research to show that that is the case?
Yeah, it's cyclical and circular and undefined in many aspects. We have today a return migration to Senegal. I'm working a little bit on Senegal, and you cannot really explain it. And why they do that? They have good jobs in France in particular, and they return to Senegal. If you ask these people, we are doing a film series on this study, they answer you very, very clearly, it's nicer to live here than in France. I love Senegal. Huh? And so you say, okay, good. It's not an economic motivation in particular that brings people to change the place if they have to change the place. And this cycle, yeah, there exists. It's clear if you have nothing to give to the people, if you are in an authoritarian system, if your liberty is limited, you want to have more chances to survive and to have a better condition, you go away. But it's not so clear if you choose always the place in which the conditions of living are really better. They are, again, the major motivation of relative majority of the migration decisions are related to love. Family reunification. That's the most important argument, that I go from a place to another place, or love in a sense, I want to live with a person together. Yeah.
Other questions?
If the trend does go more towards cities, you have cities becoming larger, what is the implication on tax policy?
Yeah, it depends on the place. The taxes are organized in different logics. I have worked on 20 European cities, and we analyzed social innovations in these cities, and we find out that clearly in a stronger federalist system, this autonomy is higher, and in this sense, the tax system allows to have a better entry of what are decisions of the local level or of the urban level to invest or not. So in a certain sense, it plays an important role what are the tax system. Nevertheless, in more or less all cities, we find ways and strategies to develop social policies, even without tax entries. And the explanation, how they find money to do it was our question, clearly. And we have seen that the civil society and philanthropic organizations invest in social policies too, because they see that in this way the city can be more competitive, and perhaps in a second moment have more entries related to other logics of taxes. Turin, for instance, one of the richest cities in Italy in the 1960s and 70s until the 1980s, it was the Fiat city. It is always a little bit the Fiat city. But today the major investment in social programs are the Banca San Carlo. That's a private actor, a private foundation, which helps people in difficulties. And they are not only helping people in difficulties, but they invest also in startups and other things. So if the state is not there, economy is nevertheless sufficiently interested to have a performing city, an economic performing city, to give them money to do things they cannot do otherwise, because otherwise the economy suffers too much. And here you have this local responsible economy. Banca San Carlo is from Turin, so they invest them. If you don't have no more this kind of economy, this kind of no money from taxes, your city will close the doors.
Do you see that as a moral obligation for profit-making enterprises to contribute to the social well-being or to the stability of the communities in which they operate?
You have to ask this to Professor Enderle. I'm very skeptical about the idea that you have to have a moral if you are entrepreneur. But okay, it seems that this exists as teachings here. So I think it's better if it is not moral, if they decide to invest in social programs because they have an interest to do that. And I can imagine that I see many programs in rich and large firms developed for having, for instance, women there, high qualified women there. And what they do, they develop places for their kids, for instance, and they organize programs to be in the firm even if you are mother. And that means not that they like families. They have simply problems to find qualified people for their firms. So it's the same discourse in the cities. If I analyze these meetings between economic actors in the city, investors, and city governments, and they talk not about helping people, they talk about conditions to create a city in which you want to invest. They say, we need good quality of the environment, we need many restaurants from different places of the world because our creatives like that. And so the investment arrives from a very classical interest logic. It's better if you have Banca San Carlo, clearly. I think it's good, it's not bad. But to say to the people that this is the best argument in such a mobile society, it's hard to implement. Economy likes rules. What we lack in this moment are rules. Because if you introduce rules on the national level, they say simply we change the country of investment or we change the country of being. Fiat is now in the United States, Fiat Chrysler. And I think that these rules we have to develop are no more on the level of the local or the urban world, but on the supranational world, on the regional world. European Union can be a very good example, could be a very good example, how to reintegrate a globalized economy in something like a moral economy.
We may have an opportunity for one more.
It was behind, I think, somebody. No?
Thank you. I want to ask, so there are some countries where wealth is really localized and concentrated in the residents. So they welcome migrants, but they never really give them citizenship. So there's an opportunity for economic advancement, and that kind of pushes people to settle there and migrants to move there. But there's never really a chance for social advancement in some places in the world. So as someone who's researched this, what do you think is a good starting point to shift that from, say, asylum to co-development policy?
It's a large, important question. Yeah. Cities has not the possibility to give citizenship. That's really a problem. The nation state is in a certain way the old way of organizing our society. By not having a nation state, but do regional development politics, parks and things like that can be managed by the nation state, but not the citizenship. But if you have not this possibility, and this is the today reality that citizenship is on the national level, it's very hard to give other chances to the people in developing their chances to accede to better positions. I'm very puzzled about the discussion between Nussbaum and Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen says something like that. We don't need to discuss about social welfare in this moment. We don't need to discuss about strong welfare systems, but we need to discuss about people and how to help people to make a step forward. And in such a complex society like ours, finding solutions like your answer, like your question indicates, it's extremely difficult, but find solution for people is easier. So if you are in a bad situation, in a bad place, it's not important to fight for social rights, but it's important that you have a place in which you can find help for you, for your situation. And this is what Amartya Sen would say, give the people the chance to make a step forward. Okay, Nussbaum, in contrast, says we need something like basic rights, that people can survive and can survive in dignity. But this idea is very problematic because many of these basic rights are not are not possible to be implemented for all people, are for some people not reachable. I think about disabled people, for instance. So for me, it's better to think like Amartya Sen says. In a certain way, I would say first individual rights and then social rights. First, see how I can help a concrete person, and then, talking about Nussbaum in a second moment. That's, Taylor against Habermas. It's really an important question you make. But I will say first, help the people to have a chance to think tomorrow, and then you can discuss and fight for other rights. Yeah?
Ladies and gentlemen, Sandro Cattacin.
It's chocolates.
Well, no, it's not chocolates. You never give a box of chocolates to a Swiss. I mean, we know better. This is a blank journal with the heraldry of the university on the cover. And in the form of good Catholic guilt, I'm told that if you leave this on a table in plain sight, it will nag at you long enough until you write something. And so I encourage you to do that. And when you do, please share it with us. Sandro, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.